A lot of what I would have wanted to say has been said by Professor Kissel. I don't know whether I may present something in a more precise or interesting manner. I asked a question just as Professor Kissel, whether this is really a process of backsliding, degeneration of Czech democracy, or whether it is only a change vis-a-vis the original state, and whether it's a crisis of Czech liberal democracy, or whether problems that we perceive in Czech liberal democracy are closely also related to combination of liberalism and democracy per se. In my presentation, I would like to set out from the basic assumption that some interpretation of liberal democracy tend to lead to systems that do not emphasize participation of people or public deliberation. This can be considered as a threat and weakening of democracy for many reasons. So briefly, what is the deliberative policy with participation of citizens or exchange of arguments in the public space, and why it is important? There are very many reasons in political democracies speaking about the importance of dialogical approach. One of the arguments is the moral argument, namely, if citizens are not interested in political process and do not participate in it, and there are different ways how they can participate in the political process, then there is a disruption in the social justice and the just distribution of democratic duties, and also a fair share of liberties. Of course, there may be other advantages of dialogical democratic policy, epistemic advantages. This theory presumes that there's a lower probability that you will be disappointed if epistemic advantages include increased probability of adopting good decisions. Not the arguments may be valid, but they appear in the discussion on the advantages of dialogue type of democratic policy. One of these things is possible to control the dialogue and where in situations where there may be a lack of real resolution of problems. From my point of view, an active citizenship, the most important is the moral argument. What differentiates democracy from other systems is the possibility to participate, controlling one's own life, and prevent some pressure. And if only we have just a vague possibility to implement our freedoms, and if we do not implement our freedoms, then political freedom may be an ideal, but it is not a realistically implemented freedom, and hence the equality among citizens is reduced. Real democracy is when all the barriers are removed to implement democratic policies, and if most society does not exercise their freedoms, then there are very many factors then the system cannot be called fair. So not to have only theoretical possibility, but practical one. The basic factor of democracy is that it can give you the possibility of not to succumb to domination. And if we ignore that, then liberal democracy is in a problem. For this reason, I believe that we need to strengthen democracy in the meaning of strengthening active citizens' participation.
The question is how within liberalism this can be achieved, because some forms of liberal ideology have a tendency to undermine democratic dialogue policy in terms of motivation. They do not sufficiently motivate citizens to participate in public life, and also emphasis on the private dimension of life, and also the reserve attitude of some version of liberalism to an interpersonal nature of human identity, topic of social solidarity, cohesion, and also another drawback of liberalism is that some structural inequalities are not dealt with in the society. So if we admit that these issues should be dealt with, we often encounter the question how to motivate citizens to a higher political involvement. And then there are some questions we have already discussed, such as how to promote political knowledge, political education of citizens, and if we can transfer information in this respect. So is there a direct relationship between political awareness of citizens and their motivation to participate in public life? So the assumption is that participation in public life requires awareness and knowledge. But I like to say that the relation between awareness and participation is not straightforward, and it's mediated by the feeling of mutual respect and cohesion of the citizens. So primarily, we should be asking why knowledge is important. So of course, knowledge on democracy prevent disappointment from democracy, and it protects us as citizens. Without knowledge, it is not possible to lead rational discussions, and the citizens should be presented fact. And knowledge is also a prerequisite of implementation of freedom. But this does not mean that there is a direct link between citizen education or the transfer of some values and knowledge and the fact of citizen participation. As the approach of Amartya Sen or Martha Nussbaum shows, the capabilities approach, that the real function of education or political freedom is based on many factors, conversion factors, such as life expectancy, employment context, cultural context, social, economic situation, and many other factors. And these factors are involved in the process of transferring information into real life and citizen participation and in decision-making process on public affairs. And this is also explained by the theory of communication, which shows that information, a piece of information as such, is one thing, and another thing is the response of people to that particular piece of information in the political process. And we can see that there is a large number of contexts. Before I will talk about the motivation of citizens to be able to utilize information on political and for political participation. So I would just like to say, to speak about a topic which appears sometimes and is related to citizen education. So where's the border between indoctrination and citizen education? The citizen education should be perceived as a prerequisite for the implementation of political freedom, which is a basic value. So if we do not participate, the freedom as something absolute, which can be damaged by any intervention in our lives. So if we perceive the freedom as self-determination, if we accept freedom as non-dominance, and then we can define the issues of control of our life. And then I think that the question, if we are being indoctrinated, which is not acceptable in the liberal system, so then this issue is automatically solved. And what does non-indoctrinating education look like? We are not sufficiently focused on the contents of citizen education. And certainly the citizen education should be somewhere in between transferring universal habits, values, knowledge, capabilities, and considerations of a specific situation of different citizens, their specific conditions they live in. So this respect to particular conditions of human life are contemplated by Martha Nussbaum in her theory of education, and citizen education, according to her, should be an integral part of liberal democracy, and we must avoid constructing or designing the education as exclusive thing for young gentlemen, but it must be based on three pillars: Socratic self-examination, world citizenship, and narrative imagination. Looking more closely, we can see that citizenship education is very important to include critical ability education and compassion education, to increase compassion among people in the community. So how can we transfer the notion, the idea of citizenship education to real motivation? So the citizen education can lead to participation only if it's not disturbed by basic structural inequalities within the society. The democratic knowledge, which is important for citizen participation, will be used only if we take into account social, economic, structural factors in the society. So it is not possible to draw the lack of motivation just from low knowledge or ignorance of political process, but also the exclusion in the society. So we must build compassionate democratic community, and according to Nussbaum, compassion is recognition that another person, in some respects similar to myself, suffered of misfortune, of which they are not to be blamed fully. So and it is important in terms of the to add social solidarity to education. Also, some other theorists agree with that, because they show sometimes that the motivation of people to participate in the election is the feeling that they want to be a useful part of the community, of the society. So this cohesion is important. And the problem of compassion is that it can be an exclusive category if applied only to closed communities. So for compassion to work requires equality in the society. So there should not be dominance and oppression. Professor Kissela spoke about toxic capitalism, toxic machismo, and these are exactly the things which prevent compassion to become the basis for strengthening of the democracy. Because if compassion functions only in closed communities, and if there are some exclusion relationships in the society, it will never have the expected effect. I'd like to conclude with saying that the crisis of the Czech Republic democracy is not just a crisis of compassion. And the crisis of Czech liberal democracy is not due to communism only. It consists of inherent weaknesses of liberal democracy as such. Also, the post-communist times, degradation of political and citizen culture have contributed to this. And also political elites played a big role. And in my opinion, they took the problematic aspects of the liberal democracy and amplified them by their explanation of democracy, which was very common in the 1990s in the Czech Republic, the emphasis on private property, aversion against solidarity, against community, and that democracy as a tool of achieving economic prosperity, which only a part of society can achieve as a result. And insufficient discussion and lacking citizen education is a big drawback of the society.